Hello everybody, and welcome again to my channel. This time I want to talk about the September 2017 edition of JW Broadcasting. In this edition, Samuel Hurd of the governing body goes out of his way to talk about punctuality and how important punctuality is. And this, of course, is mostly in reference to attending meetings of Jehovah's Witnesses. He wants you to be on time for that, but then he weaves in all kinds of other ancillary points which he shoehorns into fitting into his narrative. I'm not going to bother spending any time discussing that because, quite frankly, I don't think it's worth it. But the very fact that they would spend a JW Broadcasting asking people to be on time to their meetings shows you the amount of control they desire to have over people. And this was a theme that came up multiple times during the over 30 years that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses. We regularly had talks on being punctual to meetings. I even gave some of those local needs talks. And I would always encourage people to be on time. It was something that we did because a lot of people were chronically late to meetings. And can you blame them? I mean, who'd want to be on time to those meetings? So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. What I do want to talk about, though, is they had a video that was done in black and white that was basically showing what preaching work was like in the 1920s. And I say the 1920s because the literature being offered at the time was The Millions Now Living Will Never Die book, which was based on one of the talks that Joseph Rutherford gave. And the interesting thing is they showed a scenario whereby, finally at the end of the day, the person that was doing the preaching work found some interest. The person that was interested was a father of 2 young daughters, and apparently his wife had just died. So he has this material that's preached to him about how he's going to see his wife again soon in the resurrection. And of course, the thrust of this was the whole Millions Now Living Will Never Die campaign. And the interesting thing to me was the individual in that video ended up becoming one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And you flash forward to the modern day where those 2 young girls were now very elderly ladies. And they were sitting there showing their experiences from growing up as Jehovah's Witnesses. So at the best, that's sometime in the 20s or very early 30s that would have happened just based on the timing of the talk. The fact, or the part about that that's interesting to me is the Watchtower glazes over the fact that that man and his daughters were basically lied to. The campaign at the time was that the resurrection would happen very soon so that millions alive at that time would not die, but the resurrection would happen and people would live forever. Most of the people that were old enough to have children in the 1920s are dead now. In fact, very few of them would actually remain because it's been almost 100 years, so they would have to be 120 years old or more. And the oldest person alive is not that old. So the ironic thing, or the interesting thing to me about this, is that they are presenting to Jehovah's Witnesses solid proof of their false prophecies right on JW Broadcasting. You don't have to be very good at math to figure out that from the 1920s till now, that campaign, Millions Now Living Will Never Die, was completely and totally wrong. That is proof positive of false prophecy. That was food at the proper time distributed by Jehovah's organization. So the thing that's interesting about that is the Watchtower tries to use the excuse that, well, it's a perfect organization run by imperfect men. So every time they have a false prophecy, well, it was imperfect men, so they can be forgiven. The only problem with that stance is, let's say back in the 1920s, you were to have disagreed with the message at the time, saying, you know something, your timing is wrong, there's no way the end is coming as soon as you think. I think that you've misunderstood 1914, and I don't agree with you. Had you said that back then, despite the fact that that was a message that was conveyed by imperfect men, you would have been kicked out of the congregation and treated as if you were sinning against God, despite the fact you were actually doing the right thing and bringing more honor to God than those who were falsely prophesying in His name. Another thing about this video that's interesting to me is the Watchtower is establishing their credentials as being long-standing false prophets. They have a track record that extends to their very beginning of predicting things that have not come to be true. And when they do this, they say that it's God's truth in due season, or they use other similar language that basically says this is the message that God is giving to us for us to preach to people. So essentially what they always do is they, in not so many words, say that they are speaking for God. When you claim to be God's organization, that is a direct claim to be speaking for God. If you claim to be the organization of a politician or of a company, things that you said would be treated as if they came directly from that politician or from that company. When you said things that were not authorized by the politician or the company, you would be fired. Your credentials would be revoked. You would no longer be the spokesperson for that entity. So, when the Watchtower claims to be God's channel of communication, God's organization, whatever wording they want to use, they are claiming to speak for God. And getting things wrong is proof positive of false prophecy. And now they have done us the favor of putting the video on the internet on their own website for all to see. So if you have not yet watched the September 2017 version of JW Broadcasting, I recommend that you do it. And I recommend, if you know people, that you start conversations with them, especially if you know Jehovah's Witnesses. And point that video out to them. Say, did you notice that the article that was being preached about was millions now living will never die? The man that became one of Jehovah's Witnesses at that point is now dead. He never saw his wife resurrected. And his two young daughters, who were probably 3 and 4, no older than 5 or 6 at the time, are now very elderly ladies, even in that video. This is on the website for all posterity. Thank you to the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves for putting this up there. And that video, ironically, is not new. That's a couple of years old. They used to show that to, or somebody showed that to people that were delegates to international conventions a couple of years ago. And I know this because one of my friends that went to such an international convention forwarded me that link to that video. So I have seen that before, and I believe I commented about it before, but it's been a couple of years. So anyways, I thought I would point that out. So thanks for watching.